All right, I want to move on to the National Cabinet Committee meeting. It's underway or shortly about to start in Canberra. Joining me to discuss, well, there's been some breaking news on this. We'll get to that and some other issues. Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell in our Sydney studios. Andrew, I want to start at the top of the show with your breaking news, because you've got a sense there's been two meetings. I'll catch people up today. One has been all the health experts. They're called CMOs, Chief Medical Officers of the Commonwealth and the states and territories, sitting around a table having their conversations. It's been going on for a couple of days. They're putting up recommendations to this newly formed National Cabinet, which is the PM and all the state leaders. Now, between these two meetings, you seem to have a pretty good steer about what the health experts are going to recommend to the state and Commonwealth leaders. What do you know?
Well, in the last hour, I've confirmed that there are basically two proposals going there, Peter. So it's going to be up to the Premiers and the Prime Minister what they do. So the proposals that have been, I guess, leaked to me, one is this restriction on pubs, clubs and nightclubs, where they would say you can only have one person per 4 square metres. That doesn't mean everyone stands 4 metres apart. It means, for example, in a venue of 200 square metres, you could only have 50 people. And you could see that would clear out venues a bit. It would mean, hopefully, the medical officers would suggest more social distancing. But still on the table, and I thought last hour, to be frank, it was off the table, and going to that meeting for consideration, as I understand, is this thing I revealed yesterday, a potential ban on indoor gatherings over 100 people. And I guess there's a fair argument for that, in the sense that we had just this afternoon news that Senator Andrew Bragg was contracted the virus as one of, he said, 13 or 14 people at a wedding a couple of weekends ago. So you can see the potential for spread at such gatherings when there's 100-odd people. And the information I've got over the last couple of days is I think the PM's pretty keen potentially on that sort of measure. So whether it's one measure, the other, or a combination, we've got some serious changes going ahead. The other things I've heard in terms of the medical officers' discussion, Peter, is that there's going to be some sort of cap on theatre attendances, as I understand it. I don't know what that is. And that they looked at the issue of gyms and fitness centres and decided not to recommend to close them down at this point. But we can see, you know, it was only Friday you had a ban on mass gatherings over 500, emptying the stadiums, etc. We can see how fast it's moving. It's been put to me in a couple of weeks' time, you could have a shutdown situation where restaurants, cafes, bars are told to shut down. So we'll wait and see. I mean, it's not good news in terms of the outbreak continuing, I guess. The other thing put to me today was there might be a situation where there was a ban on public gatherings at a certain limit nationally, but states like New South Wales, who have bigger outbreaks, might have smaller requirements. This is all for the Premiers and the Prime Minister to decide this evening. I think the meeting gets underway around 7 o'clock.
Yeah, and look, the nature of these things too, and this is, you know, partially the reason why there is a national committee, is so that there is some level of consistency. One state's not tougher than the other, and then the other premier is open to accusations of not taking it seriously. So I do think they're going to end up with a uniform ban across the country. Interestingly, we're looking at what's happening in London. I might have a grab of Boris Johnson, but they're going very hard on the issue of older people. And as we know, they were talking about earlier, you know, going down the path of herd immunity, basically putting some people at risk in order that they get some level of inoculation amongst the community. It seems like they're rapidly pulling back from this, and there are concerns in the UK that they could have an Italy scenario, too much, too late. Let's have a listen to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
It looks as though we're now approaching the fast growth part of the upward curve, and without drastic action, cases could double every 5 or 6 days.
Okay, so there is requirements in the UK for older people, 70 years and older, pregnant women, and obviously people with other vulnerabilities to be at home for 14 weeks. Now, that's an extraordinarily long period of time. I have to say, Andrew, there's a bit of a mixed message here in Australia. We've talked about for some time restrictions on visitations to retirement homes, nursing homes and other places where there are a lot of older Australians, but we sort of haven't got a definitive judgment on that. We're getting a bit of a mixed message on schools. I understand the workforce issues, but it seems private schools are closing and government schools are not. There's more money in the stimulus out of New South Wales to properly clean schools. You want to hope they're being cleaned anyway, but there you go. What do you think is going to be the result on schools? Do we know?
Oh, at schools, I'm expecting no change at this point, but every day they review it. So, you know, early next week they could shut them, who knows, or in 2 weeks. All depends on where the level's at, but I'm told as of tonight there was no plan to make a change there. On aged care, there is going to be something considered by that National Cabinet around restricting visitors. Having said that, I was still told that family would be able to visit in some capacity, but there would just be a lot tighter rules and heavily enforced on who goes in and out of those aged care facilities. Obviously, that's pretty important. I have put the question around the place today too, Peter, about whether we'd consider a British-style ban, isolating people for several months if they're over 70. That's not on the table at the moment. But we just don't know where this thing's going. That's kind of the scary and sad thing about it. And what's true today probably won't be true in 3 weeks' time, let's face it.
And what about the Parliament? I mean, it returns on Monday. It would appear now there has been a fulsome discussion between the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition Business and the two managers in the House to work a coordinated way to get this stimulus, or at least the first stimulus package through. I would suspect we're going to see another one by the end of the week, and we may be legislating for 2 next week. How are they going to handle all of that?
Well, we're going to have a situation where more than a third of the Parliament isn't there next week, Peter. There's been agreement between the opposition and government that there are only 90 members of the House of Representatives are going to attend out of the 151, and there'll be 30 pairs. That's probably just as well, given we've already got 3 MPs who've got coronavirus and 3 others who've just announced they're self-isolating because they've been in contact with Andrew Bragg, so they're dropping like flies. In the Senate, 54 of the 76 will show up. That is because they'll have 20 opposition, 20 government, 14 crossbench, not with Rex Patrick now. So there'll be a situation where they can pass that important legislation. Looks like 2 rounds of stimulus, not just one, or, as you say, the second round is not really stimulus, it's just keeping industries alive. And Anthony Albanese said to Scott Morrison today that he's looking to support that, so that'll be a relief to a lot of Australians. That money will get through the Parliament.
And what about Qantas? You know, there is big changes today. 90% of their international schedule will be dropped for the period of coronavirus, some 60% reduction in domestic flights. Obviously, we have a relatively small market in Australia, but ever since we've had the entrance of other players like Virgin, it's been a far more competitive industry. I remember when I was a kid when it almost cost the same to go to Queensland as it was to fly to London. The last thing we'd want is an airline to hit the wall, and I'm not saying anyone will, but that's got to be something front of mind for the government.
Oh, well, we remember the bad old days of Ansett collapsing in about 2001, don't we? So we don't want that, and that's a real concern. At the moment, the only things I've heard speculation on in that space, Peter, are just axing all the charges for the airline. So passenger movement charge, security charges, maybe even aviation fuel excise and the air services fee. All up, if airports are full, which they're not at the moment because some of that's related to how many passengers you have and how many flights you have, that's worth more than $1 billion a year to the industry. So that would be a significant change by government. But we may get to the point we'll need handouts as well. In fact, I've no doubt we will, if you're, say, going to keep those competitors, Qantas in particular, alive. Simon Birmingham this morning on Sky News, he wasn't ruling that out, but he was kind of making clear that wasn't in this package. He was saying, they were saying to him at the moment they had plenty in cash reserves, but, you know, do they have 9 months' worth of cash reserves? You've got Qantas slashing 90% of international, 60% of domestic up until the end of May. They got big problems ahead. It just depends how long this kind of disaster lasts, really.
Well, of course, and when they're safe to fly again, when those flights are back in the schedule, people are going to have money in their pocket to pay for the tickets and to spend overseas. So that, you know, this is the other issue too, if there's been some economic contraction. Before you go, $2 billion in New South Wales. This is the first, what I'd call, strong stimulus signal from one of the state premiers and treasurers out there today. This is predominantly business holidays, payroll tax exemptions and other things. I think it's a lot of leadership by Gladys Berejiklian and her treasurer. It's something I think all the other states, though, need to do. Do we have any sense the other states will move in this direction? I
think Queensland's announced $500 million. I think WA's announced $500 million, but that's mostly just freezing bills, I think, the other day. So there's a lot more they can do and will have to do, let's face it. I mean, we're coming up to budget time. You'd expect a lot more measures from the states. The Prime Minister's called on the states and local government to join him. But ultimately, as Matthias Cormann said this morning, Peter, you can't save every job, you can't save every business. And unfortunately, some businesses and jobs, particularly casuals, are going to hit the wall here. And it's a sad state of affairs. Government should do the utmost that they possibly can to limit that damage. But some of that damage is unavoidable. I mean, personally, I'm not hearing this from anyone in government, but personally my belief is we'll see an unemployment rate of 10% again like we did in the early 1990s, and that's something most Australians have forgotten. But unless this sort of stops in the next couple of months, I think that's kind of unavoidable.
Well, we're going to talk vaccines after the break, so let's hope there's good news
Let's
there.
hope.
Andrew Clennell, thanks very much for your time.